Good afternoon. Welcome back after the break. Welcome back to Brussels. Welcome back to AWS Summits. It's great to be stood in front of a real audience, a real 3D people for a change. It makes a real change. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I guess as we're not on a giant web conference, I can be confident that I won't accidentally mute myself today, and nor will you see my cat just wander across the screen in front of me at any point. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here, as I said. Welcome to everybody, by the way, on the live stream too. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Orlando Scott Cowley. I lead the worldwide public sector security team at Amazon Web Services. Me and my team are here to help you overcome your security challenges and your security problems. We're here to help you learn about security in the cloud. I run a team of security experts who specialize in security and compliance, privacy, sovereignty, and all aspects of what that involves in the cloud. So please feel free to have a chat with me later on if you'd like to. Today we're talking about data protection in the context of being in Europe. It's a pretty big topic, and I've got lots of things to bring you today. Lots of components to that discussion, lots of ways to think about it, and also lots of tools and resources which you can take away. And you will have seen on your chair, or you will have just been given a card which will take you to all of those resources as well. One of the things that we do really early on with customers to understand how to solve those thorny security and compliance challenges is work backwards from the customer. My team and I have had thousands of conversations with customers about security and compliance, not just in the cloud and AWS, but in general. And we help customers build security strategies around dealing with those requirements and those regulations. So what I'm bringing you today is the results that we've learned from those conversations. What do we learn from you when we talk to you about adopting the cloud? There are two key questions that I always start out with when I talk to customers. The first one is, where are you today? It's a pretty powerful question when you ask it to a customer, because it helps them explain and articulate their goals and their ambitions and their reasons for wanting to adopt the cloud. It's used to give us a starting point, if you like, that we can work backwards from. And when we ask this question, we can learn what the customers want, and we can learn how to address those needs. The other question to ask is, what are your goals? And in relation to security and compliance, you've got to consider that when we ask that question, whatever the goal is, security and compliance generally underpins it, because it's always there. If it's to migrate database infrastructure into the cloud, then there's security and compliance involved. If it's to roll out a new web app that uses a serverless infrastructure, security and compliance is involved. So understanding the goals at a really high level is a very powerful way to work out how we can get to that point in the future. How do we get from where we are today to where you want to be in the future? We also run workshops that will help you with that. So if you haven't come across the Cloud Adoption Framework, the Cloud Envisaging, Cloud Alignment workshops, have a chat with any of the AWS team here today, and they can put you in touch with someone that can help you run those or be part of those workshops. Those workshops are there to, as I said, work backwards from your goals and build a strategy for adopting AWS as you go. Now, when I chat to customers, there are generally three things that they want to achieve when they talk about AWS. There are three foundational components of their goals that they want to bring to their organization. We often see that these align with really every type of customer, not just public sector or commercial, government, large, small government organizations. And everybody talks about the first one, innovation. They want to bring innovation to their customers, to their users, to their customers' customers, to their citizens. And they want to bring innovation in a way that modernizes their infrastructure, modernizes the service they bring to their customers too. And they see the cloud as a way to bring that innovation into their organization, because it's quite hard to do some really cool things with mobile apps, a serverless infrastructure, if you're not able to adopt the cloud at the same time. Because the cloud means you can spin up those projects and spin them down again, or you can scale them out, depending on how successful they are. We see organizations now have a cloud-first policy. So every single customer we talk to wants to adopt the cloud. But the journey between today and that adoption is tricky, especially when we start to talk about data protection. And of course, security underpins all of that, as I said, security and control. And here, in particular, there's a really interesting paradox that I see with certain types of customers. On one hand, there are customers that will come to me and to my team and to AWS because they understand that AWS gives them greater security control, compliance control, and tools to solve their security problems than they could achieve on their own with a traditional infrastructure. And those customers will put their most sensitive workloads into the cloud, the workloads that they want to protect to the maximum extent possible. And then on the other hand, you've got customers that will only put dev and test workloads in the cloud. And that's kind of like their toe in the water, if you like. They're starting out that journey and they're getting to the cloud. They're putting dev and test in there, and then eventually they start to move all of their major business applications, their major workloads into the cloud as well. A couple of really interesting places to be, I think. But innovation, security, and the cloud itself are the three main things that people come to, certainly to me, about. I understand that adopting the cloud is tricky. I understand that it requires a high degree of communication, planning, and trust. And ultimately, that's why I'm here. I want to help you explain, help you understand and appreciate the tools that we can make available to you that will help you adopt the cloud in Europe. When I talk to customers, the conversations I have with customers often fall into trends. We often find that you've got particular issues that form a trend as they go. And I'll talk about some of those trends today. But I get questions about compliance, about assurances, about third-party assurances of cloud service providers, as well as a lot of, let's be fair, misconceptions, rumors, law, L-O-R-E, areas that customers think about that we need to help them move beyond so they can continue on their strategy to adopt cloud. And those are not insurmountable challenges by any stretch of the imagination. They can be overcome with dialogue, with controls, with technology. And I'll talk a lot about those today. My team are here to help you. As I said, I have a team of security experts that can help you with those conversations, both strategic at your C-suite, your leadership level, and also at your technology, your architect level as well. And we deal with customer questions around specific types of threats, specific types of security control, specific types of request for data. And I see customers trying to balance that as they adopt the cloud. And they're rolling out these new projects, and they want to be agile. So my team are here to help you to remain agile in that process. But also, I see that there are new projects springing up everywhere, and customers want to bring innovation to their citizens and their users. And right now, there's another particular problem we're trying to overcome, and that's the global chip shortage. That's also affected the supply chain of traditionally purchased customer hardware, and it's accelerating other projects into the cloud. So we see a lot of people coming to us. You're coming to me saying, we want to do this project, we want to do it faster because we need to get it up and running because we haven't been able to do it at the pace we wanted to. And I see a lot of anticipation around the traditional European data protection requirements of GDPR and Schrems II, and again, I'll address those today. This presentation is really here to help you. I'm going to give you a lot of resources to help today with those challenges. The card you've got on your chair will take you straight to those resources. And I want to really start by recognizing that data protection, those two words, in Europe is not necessarily about just GDPR or Schrems II. And in fact, around the world, it's not just about those two things. There's a whole, let's call it a bouquet of issues that we have to address. And what I see at the moment in the decision-making process in our customer leadership teams is that those issues are all being compressed into one large ball. And what I want to do today is unpick them and go through them one by one. And let's talk about addressing them individually, because when we do that, then we can move beyond them. And when we start to think about the compliance requirements that we have in Europe, we go well beyond the traditional GDPR and Schrems requirements, and we start to think more about data controls, residency, data privacy, data sovereignty, and security. And there's a lot to that conversation. So I'll bring you those tools today. What I won't do is talk about the tactics of compliance with things like the EU data transfer requirements, or dive deep into the EDPB supplementary measures. Those are 2 presentations in their own right, which I would love to do, but there are 2 great videos by my colleagues Esther Stringham and Hans Boss, and you've got links for those in the presentation today, so you can enjoy those later. And this presentation really is about giving you the understanding and the assurances that you need to be able to go on a journey to the cloud with AWS in Europe. And I want to give you the resources that will help inform your decision-making process and help guide your compliance requirements, your risk assessments, your privacy impact assessments, and provide solutions to help you meet and address some of those particular challenges. Now, when we talk about data protection in Europe, there's, let's call it a landscape. There's a whole range of issues that I've already said that are being compressed into one particular big ball of decision-making blocking challenge. Overall, there are lots of influences on data protection around the world, but the European regulatory, legal and security landscape is quite specific. But I want to extend it slightly today as well to bring in some of those security requirements too. I should, by the way, point out that I'm not a lawyer, so whatever I say today can't constitute any form of legal advice. My lawyers in the room or watching on the live stream. How situations like GDPR are interpreted and Schrems II are interpreted is down to individual customers. It's down to you. So I can't, unfortunately, give you any legal advice today. But this landscape that we talk about is, let's call it a confluence of issues. It's affecting decision-making in customer leadership teams, and it is slowing down some decision-making. So we want to try and move beyond that, and hopefully the resources I've got today, and by the end of the presentation today, you'll feel more comfortable about those resources and how to move forward. So what do we need to know? Well, let's start with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. It's just gone past its 4th birthday, hasn't it? Arguably one of the most important pieces of law and regulation in Europe. And it's there to protect the fundamental rights to privacy for individuals in the EU and the protection of their personal data. And it's really there to harmonize the standards where we talk about data protection across Europe. And it includes some really robust requirements. And as I said, it's arguably one of the most important pieces of legislation because it raises the bar. It raises the security posture for the protection of personal data. You will already know, and I'll remind you again, that you can use all of AWS's services to process personal data, i.e. the data that you put into AWS, in your accounts as customer data in compliance with GDPR. So that's already great news. In July, the Court of Justice of the European Union issued a ruling, which we now know to be called the Schrems II ruling, regarding the transfer of personal data of EU individuals outside the EU. That's named after Maximilian Schrems, the Austrian lawyer. The CJEU basically, well, we know that they ruled that the EU-US Privacy Shield was no longer a valid mechanism for transferring data outside of the European Economic Area. More on that later. As a result of Schrems II, we also know that the European Data Protection Board provided a non-exhaustive list of measures, which we now call the EDPB recommendations, which talk about supplementary measures to enable those transfer of data. As I said, we won't dive into those today, but again, they're a really important part of this discussion, and one of the things that we need to consider when we think about data protection in Europe. Then we start to get a bit more global. We start to see what customers worry about around the world. In Europe, the Cloud Act is a key topic of conversation that I have with customers. It's high on the agenda of things they want to talk about. The Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act. It essentially updated a legal framework for US law enforcement agencies for requesting data held by telecommunications service providers outside of the US. Now, not just cloud service providers, social media providers, email providers, online storage providers, really any kind of service on the internet can be subject to this. The really interesting thing is that it provides a limited mechanism for United States law enforcement to request data stored in the US and overseas, a limited mechanism. And I think we lose sight of that as we go. But also, it gives us additional safeguards as well. So as countries, there are mechanisms to challenge requests that will conflict with our own individual country's law or European law. And the really important point is that it only applies to a very narrow category of data. And that's data related to serious organized crime and terrorism, which is in the US jurisdiction. And that's a very, very important point that I think we lose sight of. There are other legal factors to consider here as well. Again, high on the list of things that customers want to talk to me about is the Foreign Intelligence Services Act, the FISA Act, Section 702. And that is, again, a targeted surveillance law from the US, which is about targeted surveillance of individuals and the direct communications between those individuals. Again, only related to serious organized crime, terrorism, acquisition of weapons of mass destruction, that sort of thing. So it does come to bear there sometimes in the discussions. But what I want to do is take those things we've spoken about already and put them in the context of security challenges and take that landscape and expand it, because that's the only way I think we can start to pick apart some of those challenges and start to identify how we approach those. I always encourage customers to try and think about separating out those security and compliance challenges and being really rational about the likelihood and the impact of one of them affecting you, and making sure that we've worked out a mechanism to assess how the likelihood and impact can be calculated. So whilst these laws are on the top of mind for customers, I think dealing with them is easily achieved through the technology. So we can talk about that slightly later on. The technology helps you solve that problem, and we can talk about that. But also then on the agenda of conversations with customers are things like data location as well. So it's not just law, it's about the actual physical location of the data, it's about the operations, it's about how we make these things work. And this has crept up the agenda very recently. But for many, storing data in one of our European regions and providing, well, obviously we provide contractual guarantees around that, is satisfactory. And you can store the data in Europe. And I would always recommend storing it in a variety of different places to make it as resilient as possible. But what I'll leave you with just for a second is the question that does the location of the data help to mitigate all the risk, though? I'll let you chew on that for a second, and we'll come back to that in a while. And all of these risks we've spoken about earlier, what we could call sort of low-risk challenges, security challenges, are easily dealt with the technology. Spoiler alert, it's the encryption. Encrypt everything, use access controls, and then we've mitigated the majority of those problems. But there are some quite clear and actual security challenges that we have to attend to that are often put lower down on a risk register than some of those challenges I've spoken about already. Things like the regulatory landscape, the legal landscape, access requests. And we often neglect some of the higher risk problems that we're coming to terms with. So I want to try and redress the balance. I want to make it a bit more easy and obvious that to pay attention to the higher risk problems. And there are 5 really that I want to propose today that I think we need to ensure we're dealing with. The one that's not on the screen there is the general internet weather forecast. It's the ransomware, it's the spyware, the spear phishing, the denial of service, all of the things that we have to deal with as we occupy space on the internet. And that's a risk that we're dealing with well. And obviously I have customers who move to the cloud because they know they can achieve better levels of security and protection in the clouds and deal with those through the tools that we offer. You may have heard us talk about the democratization of security. And as I said, customers come to me because they know that they can achieve really good levels of security and compliance control in the clouds, regardless of their size. So whether they're a 2-person startup or they're a multinational, pan-European bank, you get access to the same level of technology, the same level of protection. So you don't have to compromise. And we call that the democratization of security. Secondly, something I call the apex level security issue. And that's one that is a specifically targeted threat. It's incredibly rare. Depending on your line of business, the risk varies. And that's down to you to determine, obviously. But the apex threat is the one where someone, a third party, an unauthorized third party, has taken time to research you as an individual or you as an organization and is coming after your intellectual property or your infrastructure or your data. The third is the insider threat as well. Again, also incredibly rare, but quite often one we talk to about, you tell me, is something that you're worried about. What's more likely here is not an unauthorized third party on the inside. It's actually someone who is authorized. It's the on-call administrator at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning who's woken up and had to make a change to a BGP rule, for example, misconfigures that rule, and everything starts to fall apart. The hapless or tired administrator, that casual mistake, that's a bigger insider threat than perhaps we take account for. Fourth, state-sponsored issues. Again, depending on your line of business, those are still out there. They're not going away anytime soon. And you should consider and prepare your high-value assets to be protected from those. And lastly, I think the one that perhaps we never really consider very much is the competitor intelligence issue, is that in areas of high intellectual property, people are keen to get access to that. So again, you need to identify those high-value assets and make sure those are fully protected. And then when you put that in line with all of the other compliance requirements, the legal requirements or regulatory requirements, you've got a long list of things to do. And what I want to try and be is rational about unpicking those and making sure we can identify them individually rather than compound them and realize that we can overcome them with technology, with discussion, with control. Now, talking to customers about things like the Cloud Act, about security in the clouds, about data location, there are a few myths that I want to dispel as well. I'll start off with GDPR. I believe it's an enabler. As I said earlier, it's a really important piece of legislation that helps us raise the security bar on how we handle data of European citizens around the world, not just in Europe. So it doesn't prohibit the transfer or storage of data outside the EU. It makes sure that you do the right thing, you protect that data if you do have to transfer it. It doesn't prohibit support from outside the EU or the European Economic Area either. But you must be aware, and this is what Schrems 2 does, is you must be aware to make sure that you've identified where a data transfer might take place and you've put protections in to ensure that happens safely and securely. And it doesn't prohibit the use of third parties outside of the European Economic Area either. Equally, the EDPB guidelines are there to help you. There are guidelines and recommendations that help us raise the bar of security, be better at what we do, be more secure. The guidelines are there to help with transfers rather than prevent them. So let's move those out of the way. Let's give you a couple of resources. So our AWS GDPR hub is available on the end of that link there. That's a resource that tells you everything that you need to know about GDPR and AWS. It's incredibly useful. And then also we have a CISP resources site as well. And that is there to provide the information around CISP, the CISP Code of Conduct. So you can be sure that you're using AWS Cloud in compliance with the GDPR and the compliance requirements that are provided therein. The Cloud Act, another myth here. And I'll say it again, it only applies to a really narrow category of data, that related to terrorism and serious organized crime. The way to solve that problem is to encrypt everything. Encryption is neutral. The Cloud Act is encryption neutral, i.e. there's no requirement to encrypt or decrypt the data in relation to that act. So encrypt everything, which is in line with the EDPB requirements as well. So you can solve that problem with the technology. And we believe that you need to maintain control of your data. And we provide a number of advanced encryption tools for you that will help you encrypt that data. And you can choose from third parties as well. There's a number of third-party encryption tools that you can use in in conjunction with AWS services. And remember, encrypted content is useless without the applicable decryption key. And if you hold and retain that key, then you've protected that data. Another resource, the Cloud Act Hub, is there. Again, it's how AWS can help you with the Cloud Act and what it means in relation to AWS. And also, if you want to read it from the source, there's a US Department of Justice white paper which explains a bit more about the Cloud Act, which has some really good FAQs in there as well. So you can read that too. Now, I want to also, as part of dispelling these myths, challenge data location as well. I want to challenge the fact, and I gave you the question earlier, does the location of the data mitigate all of the risk? Because depending on where you put the data, there's quite a few risks that still exist. Now, as a security team, we sat down and thought about this, and we wrote a blog post about it, which you'll find online. And I believe that when you think about having a traditional security problem, i.e. something happens in the organization, there's an initial compromise, isn't there? There's an initial event that happens that then everything falls apart afterwards. And there really are only 5 ways. If you can think of a 6th, please let me know. I would love to know what the 6th one is. But there are 5 ways that that initial compromise happens. And tell me if you agree. So the first one's unpatched vulnerabilities. Yes? Lots of security challenges exist today because of unpatched vulnerabilities. The second one is security misconfigurations. Again, a problem in organizations where we're not, where vulnerabilities remain unpatched, systems are misconfigured, default passwords are used, that sort of thing. 2 really good ways to compromise an organization. The third one, weak, leaked, stolen passwords. Gaining access to an organization through legitimate accounts that have been stolen elsewhere or leaked elsewhere. Number 4, social engineering. And number 5, insider threats. Those are the 5 ways that organizations, I believe, get compromised initially. What happens after the compromise, whether it's ransomware or data leak or some other problem, is all of the cool and sexy stuff we hear about in the press. But those are the 5 things that allow a third party, an unauthorized third party, to gain access to the organization. So we have to address those. Patching vulnerabilities is not cool and sexy, is it? Talking about ransomware is cool and sexy, but vulnerability patching is not. So the location doesn't solve any of those 5 problems, does it? So I just want to challenge data location, because often we get tied up with talking about sovereignty, about location, about where the data is. And as I said, you can put in Europe data in any one of our European regions. And I would recommend that you make the data as resilient as possible by putting it in a variety of regions and availability zones. Now, how do we assess the risk and how do we deal with these problems? Well, there's a standard risk management doctrine which I think we can apply here, which works really well. And it works really well because it means we can punch some numbers into some of these problems. So we can work out when we're talking about data transfers or disclosure or security or vulnerabilities or patching, what the risk is to us as individual organizations. So in your businesses, you can go back to work on Monday and you can use this equation to work out what is the risk to us. The likelihood we can deal with, we can find data for that. The impact is down to you as individual organizations. And once you punch those numbers in, you get a number, a risk number. We put that in our risk register and off we go. So let's use an example. Let's talk about data disclosure. So often you'll come to me and you'll say, we're worried about our data being disclosed to a law enforcement agency from anywhere in the world, not just the US or your own country, from any other country. The good news is I can give you data for that. So Amazon produce an information request report. It has some pie charts in it. That's 2 of them there. It's available on that link, and it's an amazingly useful resource for business leaders, for people who want to understand the risk. It's a biannual report, so it's published every 6 months, and it provides the types and number of information requests that Amazon processes from usually July to December. Remember, we do not disclose information to government demands unless required to do so to comply with a legally valid and binding order. And that's a really important point. We have a policy of objecting to overbroad requests and inappropriate requests as a matter of course, and we'll always notify where we can the customer so they can seek protection from the request as well. But you can see from the numbers that it's pretty small. The number of requests we get is pretty small. And that report is there for transparency. It shows you the number and percentage of information requests processed by AWS, broken down by country of origin as well. So you can see they come from all over the world. And if you divide, what is it, 18, I think, content requests by the millions of, let's say 1 million, of customers that we have, that's a really small number, isn't it? That's a tiny, tiny number. If you were to compare that to a provider of mailboxes or social media or online consumer file storage, the number would probably be 5 or 6 digits long. So you can start to punch in numbers to your risk management model, and you can start to work out what the challenge is there. I want to draw your attention to the last FAQ in that document as well. If you're specifically worried about US government disclosure requests in AWS, that FAQ is incredibly powerful. And it's updated every 6 months. So if your leaders are objecting to the adoption of AWS and you want to provide data, then we can do that for you. Take you back to that equation, likelihood times impact equals risk. Impact down to you as an organization. You probably know the impact of various risks already because you have risk management organizations that do that. The likelihood, we can punch some numbers in. Disclosure request is going to be down here, isn't it? It's going to be 0.00 something, compared to ransomware, which is going to be up here, which is going to be a lot higher. So start unpacking them and putting them out in a row, in a stack rank the risks, and work out what applies to me, what do I need to focus my attention on, and what can I let legal deal with later on. You'll have one of these probably as well, and you'll find that when you put those numbers into this risk matrix, you're in the green somewhere as well. So disclosure requests in the cloud are down there in the green. Things like ransomware, social engineering, data breach, denial of service will be right up there in the red, in the high-risk areas. But make sure you're spending the money in the right place. Find the right level of protection. So there's a T-shirt that Werner Vogels wears on stage that says encrypt everything. And that's how we solve the majority of these problems. Encrypt everything. There's vanishingly few reasons now not to encrypt the data. The old excuses of it slows things down or we don't have the processing are gone now, especially in the cloud because the processing and storage available to you is almost infinite. You can use in AWS the key management service, KMS. You can use that with bring your own key, BYOK. I would always recommend that you do that because KMS integrates with all of the rest of the AWS platform. If you want to do things like client-side encryption, you can, but then you're just putting encrypted data in the cloud, and that's just storing it, really. So use KMS. You could use Cloud HSM as well if you wanted to. You could use the client-side encryption SDK too. So lots of ways to encrypt the data, lots of ways to integrate with the rest of the AWS platform so you don't lose the value of the cloud and the value of the innovation that's available to you. Contractually, that's also backed up by our things like our data processing agreement, our privacy notice, all of our compliance programs, and also it's in line with things like the CISSP Code of Conduct and the EDPB recommendations. So as Werner says, encrypt everything. That's the one thing that you should go away and do tomorrow or Monday if you can. If you're finding data that's in clear text, then absolutely encrypt it. I mentioned earlier that we can talk about data transfer assessments. The presentation that my colleagues Esther Stringham and Hans Boss did is available to you, and that talks specifically about EU data transfer requirements. You can gain access to that online. They also do a follow-up to that, which is about the supplementary measures as well. And again, that dives deep into some of the controls that you can put into your AWS infrastructure to make sure you're compliant with those supplementary measures. But also, you often ask me, well, how do we know this is true? Why do I have to take your word for it? And well, you don't. You know, I can provide you with security assurances as well. And these are the assurances that you can take to your organizations. And you can say that AWS has gained these certifications, which are third-party certifications, which you'll inherit as a customer. And we've got currently about 98 of them, I think. And they are third-party global security certifications. You'll see ISO 27001 there at the top. 27017, 18, German C5. They are certifications by trusted third parties who've looked over our shoulder and who've said, yeah, these guys are doing what they say they're doing. You can gain access to all of these reports in AWS Artifact, so you can read the auditor's reports, and you can understand that you don't just need to take my word for it or our word for it. You can gain assurances through these third parties as well. I promised you some resources, and we've got lots of those, and these are the ones that I hope will help influence your decision making, and I hope will help make your journey to the cloud in Europe a lot easier. First of all, we launched last year a part of a tool on our website called the AWS Privacy Features for AWS Services, and this is where you can determine whether or not your use of individual AWS services involves the transfer of customer data, i.e. the data that you've put into AWS, you've uploaded to your account. And knowing that then lets you either deal with that, as in encrypt it and protect it and make sure your policies are covering that, but also create an appropriate disclosure to your end users or to your customers if you need to. So use that tool. It will help you greatly. Combined with that is a sub-processors tool as well. We can provide additional information on the processing activities and locations of a limited number of sub-processors that we use around Europe and around our regions to provide services that involve the processing of personal or customer data as well. And this level of enhanced information that's on that page lets you determine whether or not a sub-processor is relevant to your use of a particular region. If you're not using that region, then the sub-processor doesn't apply, obviously. On the QR code on the card you've got, and I know it's odd that a security guy should be giving you a QR code, but trust me, I've tested it. It does go to the right place. Is this page, and this is we understand really that earning your trust is fundamental to our business, to my team, to me, to helping you adopt AWS. And we know that the protection of data in Europe is key to achieving your trust. And we also know that that's a journey to go on. And we know that in a world where there's a constantly changing landscape of regulation, of technology, of risk, we know that it takes teamwork, and we would never expect you to do that on your own. So this is the kind of landing page to go to get all of that help and all of the resources that I've mentioned today. If you want to dive a lot deeper into the EU data transfer requirements, you can. This white paper is really good for that. Take that away and read it. It's on the end of that link. And also my colleague and I, Hans Boss, we wrote an ebook on EU data protection in the context of the new emerging data economy as well. So what does that mean in Europe, and how do we support that? That's a really interesting read, so have a download of that as well. And then what I'd like to do is kind of wrap up by saying, well, hopefully, what I can encourage you to think about is ticking these 4 boxes. Managing your data in the cloud and making it secure, and providing a computing environment with the ability to manage privacy controls, to manage encryption, data, content storage, and manage the access that people have to that and how that data is encrypted is what we're here to help you with. And it's what we want you to do to make sure that you can remain in compliance with all of the regulations that you have around the world, and not just in Europe, but also all of the security challenges you have as well. So going back to my question at the beginning, where are you today? Well, I'm hoping in the last 40 minutes or so, what I've done is I've given you a whole load of resources that can help guide your decision making, help untangle the decision making as well. And I hope what we've done is we've taken apart that big blob, that big sort of bouquet of challenges that we've got, and we can rationally address them one by one. And you can see that you've got controls, you've got technology, you've got support, and you've got teams of people that will help you overcome those, and it's easy to do. So where are you today? I hope you're in a better place. I hope that I've earned a bit of trust, and I hope that if you do need help, come to me, come to my team, ask anybody in AWS to help you. We're more than willing to do that. And I hope that next week when you go back to work, that you can start to think about innovation, and you can start to bring those really innovative projects to bear, because you know the security is there for you, and you know that it underpins everything that you do in the cloud. And you know that adopting the cloud in Europe, you're backed up by AWS. We're here to help you. We would never want you to do that journey on your own. So if you'd like to contact me, please do. You can track me down on LinkedIn. You can talk to me about all of this. I'm quite prepared to come and talk to you at length if you wish or not. Individually or as groups. My team, I have security experts in every specialism in AWS, right down to the deep dive technical, so we can go into detail with you as well. If you ask any member of the AWS team to put you in touch with me, they will do. So we're more than happy to do that. The training and certification team would love you to do some training as well. There's loads in there about security and compliance. So please do that when you get a moment. And lastly, also, please complete the session survey. I would love to know what you think. I'd love to know how we can do this better. And I'd also love to know what you need from me to be able to adopt the cloud in Europe, and what I can help you with and my team can help you with. So thank you very much. It's been fantastic to be back in front of an audience. It's been wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I've earned your trust. And please enjoy the rest of the summit.